I'm Arlene Stein, and I'm here today with Lori McCarthy from Newfoundland. And we're going to be talking to her a little bit today about what it means to be a Newfoundlander in Canada and what she does as a hunter, gatherer, forager, chef, and activist educator from her home province in Newfoundland. So, Lori, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really glad to have you. I'd love to start if you could give our viewers a little bit of an overview of what you do and why you do it.
Well, previously, I ran outdoor excursions and workshops here in my workshop. The outdoor stuff is all about teaching people an art and a craft of food. They were foraging based and ended with a 4 or 5 course kind of tasting meal sitting around a fire. So it was a 3 to 4 hour time spent out in the woods and out on the land with people, giving them a real sense of who we are as how it relates to food. So, everything that I serve out with people is always wild food from Newfoundland. So I won't serve any food if it don't come from here, because the whole idea, like I said, is to tell people the story of here. And so the stories of here, as you well know, come from the fish, the fishing grounds, the hunting, the foraging from the land or something, we've always done, the bottling, the preserving. So everything that we put our hand to and put to our lips that day is a story of here. The reason why we eat the food we do and why it's so important to us. And just to give some perspective. So, when stories go national about this place, well, they've had time to actually sit with me on a beach and ask me questions. And they're very small. They're 6 people maximum. And the idea is to create dialogue and ask those questions that people are not always comfortable asking.
How did you get into this field? How did you decide that this was going to be your vocation?
It was a long time doing it before I decided that it was going to be, kind of what I did. I guess easiest answer is that it kind of became a mix of my 2 past lives. 20 years in correctional kitchens, and in between there, I worked in tourism. I was a kayak guide. I worked as a chef on a tall ship. That was a short stint, but a fun one. I did hiking tours and boat tours and all kinds of stuff, and worked in some great kitchens here with some, the best chefs still own restaurants here. And I decided to get out. I ran a personal chef business too, so it was kind of, when I stopped doing it when I had my kids, and that was a very conscious decision. And I said we were able to do it, and it was important to me. I was lucky enough to be home with mom. Mom was home with us, and I said if I can do it, always this is what I'll do. And I did. It didn't last very long because what I normally do then ended up becoming a business. I started at the time, Maria was 6 months old, and she would end up on my back. We were backpacking all the time and hiking, and she's 9 now, should be 10 next month. And I started picking stuff for the restaurants. As you know, Raymond's was the big restaurant of the time and still is here. And they really became they were what, food was becoming here. And when I started foraging and picking stuff and learning about it, because the stuff I pick now is not the stuff that my grandmother picked. Some of it is, but like 5% of it is. So I wanted to get it on plate so that people coming here could actually see it and taste it and learn about it. So I was doing it for some time, maybe, 4 or 5 years, and then picking for them and picking for a couple of other places and experimented and learned about it. And then me and mom were out, having the boil up out in the berry picking grounds. And that moment for us being out on the land like that is hard to describe. And of course, as a child, you don't realize how important those moments are until you grow up and you look back and you think about it. And now as an adult sitting there with mom, I remember saying to her, I said, imagine if people who could come here, and when they came, they got to do this, something so simple, but something that was so important to us and such a part of everyday person's life in Newfoundland. Like, I don't know anyone who don't know this tradition, and and for it to be so dear in their heart. I mean, when you go home and you crawl in bed in the night and you smell a wood smoke, and it's the best. And it became, as you get older, it became more about the time that was spent with the people around you, right? And as we all know that, and I think we're all becoming consciously aware of it these days, in this situation, that the time that you spent with the people around you, the generations, and it was always a generational thing, mom, her sisters, the children, the grandparents, and that's what I wanted to do. I said to mom, I was like, what if I just took people out?
Tell us about what it means to be, you call yourself a fierce Newfoundlander. Most people don't know that Newfoundland was the last province to join Canada. In fact, only in 1949. You are a unique province in that you are an island off in the most easterly point of Canada. Tell us what it is like to be a Newfoundlander and how that differs from being a Canadian.
We do all identify, I think, fiercely as Newfoundlanders. Those of us who certainly are, and most of us are, certainly really proud of the place that we come from. So my dad always reminds me that he's a Newfoundlander because he was born before Confederation. And there's lots of them generation who will say that, no, I'm a Newfoundlander, I'm not a Canadian. Now, I identify as a Canadian as much as a Newfoundlander, but when you go places and people ask you where you're from, well, you're from Newfoundland. The more I think about it, the more it seems to be that we live really close to the generations around us. And in collecting stories from Newfoundlanders over the years, as part of this project, the ongoing project, I think that's what it is. I think it's because we're so close to the people, the generations behind us. They still remember, mom carried wood to school and there was no electricity, and the mom's mother, like their nan's generation, truly lived off the land, hunted, fished, 100% sustained themselves on the land outside of molasses, sugar, flour, very staples, right? So I think it does. I think it creates a really rooted connection to a place, and they'll be the first to remind you all the time how good we got it today, and the times back, well, in our time, like you were constantly reminded how hard it was to put that potato on the table, and why that fish is so important to put on the table, and how that moose got on the table. You're always reminded of it. So I think it really does create a strong connection to a place. And not to say it's not like that anywhere else, but it's definitely like it here.
How long has your family been in Newfoundland?
Well, as far back as my family, the generations go, right now we can trace it back to like 4 generations. So
that's crazy.
On both sides, one English, one Irish.
What do you think how do you think your childhood differed from say a kid living in Ontario like I did?
I don't know. We never talked about your childhood. I think rural living certainly has, so many of the same similarities, right? It's this enormous freedom of wide open spaces, right? And you talk to people who grew up in Northern Ontario or Iqaluit, or, it's this 100% freedom. We were like feral children. I also grew up on a lamb farm, and there was very little parenting because we were gone all day. Like everybody knew everyone. You were, guaranteed you're going to be chastised by so-and-so's grandmother down the road. Like you couldn't get away with nothing, but it was, those things always got back to your mother, but it was a real sense of being raised by a community.
I want to talk a little bit about what makes Newfoundland unique from a food perspective. And so you talk about hunting and fishing. Tell our viewers, why is that so important to the lifestyle and what makes Newfoundland so unique?
We certainly appreciate and respect, I think even more now, the fact that we can still do it. And, you know, you talk to Jeremy Charles or whatever, and the fact that we can still put that food on our plate today and serve it in our restaurants for guests that come here and enjoy, again, it's so important because it tells a story of who we are, how we persevered in a place where like nothing grows for 7-8 months of the year. And, you know, preserving and bottling jam. And like, even when I grew up, there was no strawberries in the fridge. Like, you only ate strawberries once a year when they grew on the berries outside, right? So it certainly makes you appreciate it. And like I said, even more today.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about the cod industry? Because that's sort of a foundation of your food system.
Back in the day, you weren't allowed to live in Newfoundland year round. Newfoundland were fishing grounds for the rest of the world. It was, you know, it was founded upon fishing grounds. It's why people came and stayed here, because they were so rich. It was, you know, people came over from England and Ireland and settled. And then they were the people who were producing the fish, the dried fish that then, you know, we like to say fed the world, but certainly was exported on mass quantities. And that was work in Newfoundland. And even when I grew up, Dad was a fisherman, like I said. So everything was surrounded around the fishing season. There was teacher year round, and then when fishing season came, well, there was fish. You had to work because there was work to be done. So, and today still, the fishing industry in Newfoundland is a huge industry, right? And it still definitely defines who we are.
I tell people that the best fish in the world comes from Newfoundland, but you also have a rich culture of hunting and lots of wild game.
So yeah, we have a rich, you know, culture of hunting, and we always did, again, because it was how we sustained ourselves through the seasons. So whether it was, you know, seals in the beginning of the year, and that was a hunt. And that was, you know, when sealing hunt started here, that was the first time Newfoundlanders had really been paid money for a job. And inshore, we hunted seals to feed our families. And so the next hunt then really goes on here in Newfoundland now. It's not until the fall of the year. So October is when hunting season. The big hunt here now is moose. It's the only big game we have outside of caribou. Caribou has been pretty limited in terms of the numbers, so it's not much of a big hunt anymore. You know, rabbit, grouse, ptarmigan, all that stuff is put on our plates pretty regularly. You know, not so much here the closer you get to the city, but certainly outside of the city, I mean, pantries in Newfoundland and freezers. Like, we just buy more freezers to put more meat in. But I can go all year without buying meat.
And then in terms of produce,
yeah,
you mentioned that it's very difficult to grow things on the island, which they call the rock.
Right.
Because there's very little soil.
Right.
You have the greatest amount of root cellars in the world, I think. You're the capital of root cellars.
We did, yeah. I think that could be just self-proclaimed, really. But
But tell us a little bit about what it's like to grow food on the island and what you can find. And then talk a little bit about how foraging has become part of your pantry because of the work that you do.
Yes, we do cellar a lot of the food here. You know, again, mostly traditional, mostly outside of the city. Our best crops here were always the root vegetables. So the carrots, the cabbage, the potatoes, the beets, you know, turnips. That was really what Mom's generation lived on. They didn't realize that we could grow other things, first of all. Today I can, you know, the gamut. I mean, the new farmers now have put a whole new spin on what we can grow anything here now, really. And of course, as crops are being modified to grow in colder climates, and tomatoes and all that kind of stuff. But in Newfoundland, you're very conscious over the seeds that you buy. So we don't put seeds in the ground here until the middle of June. And that's what they'll say is after, you know, 2 weeks after the last frost. Now, we've been known to have frost after that. But that's kind of when it's safe here. So, you know, even especially now, I'm looking at Instagram and people in BC, and they're like eating lettuce. And I'm thinking, okay, we don't even have anything in the ground yet. Like, I'm still bringing my, you know, little baskets of plants in at night. It was -1 the other night. So yeah, so we can grow enormous amount of stuff. We've got some amazing farmers now doing some really great work, and we have a great wave of new farmers coming, which is super inspiring, and microgreens and all that stuff. So yeah, there's the vegetables that are traditional, and then it's an amazing amount of new produce that's coming out of here. The foraging part of it was always, again, part of our tradition, mostly berries. Dandelions were tradition, still picked first green to come up after, 8 months, right? So dandelions are like, oh my gosh, when the dandelions are already here, like it's all hands are arse up in the fields making dandelions. And it was for nutrient value too, right? Because we had not eaten a green thing, right? So cabbage was usually brined, gave off gases in the cellar, so that stuff wasn't put in the cellar. So it's a real old mentality still here, some of that stuff. And again, so lots of it's eaten out of tradition. We don't have to harvest berries anymore, but we all do it because we can. And well, the deliciousness that follows, and the jams, and even when you get it once a year, like I would never buy a blueberry pie. Like, no, you eat blueberry pie when the blueberries come out. So it's so steeped in tradition. And still, when you go to someone's house, you don't leave without a bottle of jam or a bottle of pickles or something. And it's always given as tokens of appreciation of a visit. And
food is about telling the story of a place. And so
yeah.
what would you say are the top 3 most iconic Newfoundland dishes that represent your identity?
The saltfish, of course. Of course, I'm just going to keep going to fish, but it would be like fish and brews was always such a bizarre food for travelers who came here. And that was, is made out of hardtack. And it's because it's a dried flour and water cake that's made and baked off. And it's like war bread. I mean, it is delicious. We used to have it in the morning. It would be boiled, like mom would boil brews, and you'd smother it with butter and molasses, or butter and sugar. Certainly the baking is a big thing here. The tea buns, the molasses cakes, right? Those are steeped in tradition too. And, and so much of it. And the bottled meat. So the bottled moose, the bottled seal, and it's funny, I have a friend who lives in Copenhagen now, and she's a chef over there. And she said when she went over, she's like, no one ever heard of bottled meat over here. So she's like, you need to bring over some bottled moose. They're like convinced that it's not fit to eat.
So in your professional life, one of the things that you've aimed to do is connect chefs and restaurateurs to the land. You mentioned earlier in this conversation that, you were originally doing this by providing produce, providing ingredients for the restaurants. Why do you think that relationship, that symbiotic relationship, is so important and so influential for us?
In Newfoundland, you have to build relationships. And I'm sure it's not different in any other place, but there is an understanding piece, a real building piece that needed to happen between the farmers and the product, getting it, that understanding to the chefs. And so I did want to see more of that connection happening. I did want to see, and I knew a lot of farmers, and I and people who were picking stuff, and all the berry pickers, like, one of the berry pickers that I have now up in Trinity Bay. I mean, he picks like 80 gallons of blueberries and 80 gallons of partridge berries, and he carries them all out by hand because he don't want to put them on the quad, because the quad will like smash up the berries. So it's the understanding of how much the farmers and the pickers, appreciated these things, and were they going to be appreciated now if I sold them to him or sold them to her, right? So it was a big big conversation piece, and it would really needed to be, molded, right? And I'm sure that happens everywhere, but it was so amazing when it started happening here in a big way. And some of the big shakers and movers, the Raymonds, the Mallard Cottage, Todd Piern, Sean Huzzy at Chinch, like those guys, I call them like the group of 7, like the Canadian artists, because they were why it was built, and it is still here because of them.
You talk about educating people in conservation and sustainability. And I think there's a natural link. You do it on an environmental level, but there's a natural link to the human level as well. And I think what we're experiencing right now, we need the resilience and we need to understand conservation and sustainability. So what does that mean to you?
To conserve is, the act of conserving is with the purpose of creating more sustainable models. The reason why the reason why I continue to tell people about it is because I do want it to be here this time next year, in 10 years, in 20 years. I want it to be there for the next generation. And if we don't continue to promote our way of life, people won't pay attention, right? Quotas get cut all the time, fisheries get closed all the time. And to a lot of people, it doesn't have any effect on them. To me, to people in my circle, to people in the basin and in so much of rural Newfoundland and Labrador, the impact of not taking care is catastrophic to a human race that is here, like to who we are. And so there will be places, just like up north, like if they can't continue to go across the ice to reach the caribou grounds, to go across the ice to fish, to whale hunt, to do the stuff that they do in northern Canada, like here in Labrador and here in Newfoundland on the island, if we can't continue to do that, then it will be lost. And it's not just a matter of, well, we don't want it to be lost. Hold on to everything because we don't want it to be lost. It's more important than that. It's why would we lose it? It's not just about keeping it because it's always been done, because ways that things have always been done are not always the right way, right? So we have to evolve. We have to change how we put food on the plate. But the fact that it is here, and if we take care of it, we can continue to put this food on a plate. We can continue to create a model for Newfoundland that maybe just gets a little bit better than it is now. When we have high winds for 4 days in Newfoundland, all the food comes in here by ferry. So when we have high winds for like 2 days, 3 days, and all those ferries shut down, which happens all the time, or when the ice flow comes in and ferries are not running, you can see that impact in our grocery stores the next day. So the next day, and there's a grocery store in St. John's every 5-minute drive, I'm sure. The vegetable and fruit aisle is essentially wiped out. For a moment, when you look at those aisles and they're empty, it definitely reminds you of how dependent you are of the trade and how important it is that food comes in from outside. It would be just a little bit nicer in a certain sense if we could have an idea that it doesn't have to be like this, and we can be a little bit more sustainable if we take care of what we have. And I think the reason why I continue to share the stories and put that food on people's plate when they come here is because it gives them an idea of why we're so close to it.
Your company is called Cod Sounds.
Yes.
How do people find out about it? And tell us a little bit about how you've pivoted and some of the educational programs that you're offering now.
So Cod Sounds is at codsounds.ca, and on Instagram it's at Cod Sounds, and personally I'm at Eat-A-Wild. So now I have started teaching workshops here in my workshops, and I'm sitting right here, and there's we started with the spring edibles. And so what does it look like? How do you pick it? Where do you find it? And then here's all the stuff you can do with it to put it on your plate. Because I'm the believer that if we don't eat it, we won't pay attention to it. So if you can put it on your plate, you're going to have dandelion pesto for supper, and you're going to have a, wild leek aioli on your carpaccio, then you're going to eat it and you're going to pay attention to it.
And so people can take these, they can sign up for these online, codsounds.ca.
That's right.
So this question, my last question, is going to revolve around tourism. It's going to be a little bit fun. In our imaginations, when people are again allowed to travel, what would your recommendation be for the top 3 places to visit in Newfoundland? Rosemore
National Park, for sure. It is vastly different than the east coast of the island. Go to the northern peninsula of Newfoundland. It is spectacularly vast. the landscape, we have flowers and plants that grow up there that don't grow anywhere else in Canada. You know, that subarctic terrain in Newfoundland is spectacular for birding and plant life. And where else? Oh, I mean, Bonavista is on everybody's list now. It's a bustling hub of craft restaurants, you know, craft food, craft everything, soap making to Peter Burt's up there with his, he makes this gorgeous craft salt from the seawater. So that's like its own little new bustling hub up there. And that's outside of St. John's, of course.
Lori, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate your insight, and it was such a pleasure to talk to you. I hope we get to see each other soon.
I do too. Take care, and thank you so much.
All right, Lori, take care. Bye.
Bye.